Hello all, it's your girl Tiffany, Madame Luscious Black Beauty, your Poetic Psychic Pisces High Priestess, here for another one of my story times with yours truly, Poetic Psychic Pisces High Priestess. I do hope you all are doing well and feeling well on tonight. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment because that is your free way of showing your support to help the growth of this channel, guys. Okay, so before we get into tonight's story time, starting off with the introduction, guys, I do want to give a brief disclaimer that this is all original work that has been written by myself. There's no particular persons, places, or things that has to do with any real persons in particular as it relates to the story. I've told you all a few times before that the way I write is like, I guess you can call it like fact fiction or what have you, where basically it's a fictional story, but can be about like factual events or factual things that actually kind of happen in the world and different things like that, but basically written in my own words, in my own style, and different things like that, guys. Okay, so with that being said, guys, I do ask that you all govern yourselves accordingly. Okay, and sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's story time, guys. Okay, which is entitled "A Triple Murder Mystery of Annihilation." Okay, guys. So let's get into tonight's introduction. Three sinister scenarios within one twisted tale about the devious underbelly amongst the entrapped, broken heart of America. From the lower, middle, and upper class society of lies, deceptions, betrayal, and bloody murder. It's commonly said, and furthermore very well foolishly believed amongst Christian folks, that when it comes to family, blood is thicker than water. Therefore, they claim that the family that prays together stays together. Well, as sentimental as that may be, and while perhaps true for some, nothing could be further from the truth. For those who know no such loyalty and choose to slay one another. The lower class. Everybody that's somebody in a neighborhood near you. The people of all shapes, sizes, and colors around the way that brings life, love, and laughter to every hometown city worldwide. But far too often, danger, disaster, and destruction lingers in the shadows, hunting the less fortunate ones. With the highest crime rates amongst the poor, there's not a day that goes by without hearing through the grapevine of tragedy somewhere. However, it's the horrific, unsettling chaos that goes on behind closed doors of private residences that most often makes breaking news. The kind of unbelievable, spine-chilling mayhem that keeps people up for days. The Sanderson family was just like any other in their urban community, except for the fact that apparently they believed in being fruitful and multiplying, for today's day and time standards at least. 10 people lived in the Sanderson's family household, with now only a single parent, Diane Sanderson, to hold down the fort since her husband, Abraham Sanderson, found himself serving a 10-year prison sentence for armed robbery a few years ago. With 6 children and 2 grandchildren to feed, the struggle was real for Diane Sanderson, who was the sole provider for her struggling family. Although Diane works a full-time job, it was overwhelmingly obvious she still needed as much help as possible, so she received government assistance as well. The Sanderson children, Tamra, 9, and Arlen, 11, suffered from various different intellectual disabilities and required 24/7 care, which puts the Sanderson's family in the system for a totally different reason. Their 3 and 6-year-old Braxton and Kenneth and 1 and 3-year-old grandkids Audrey and Yvonne were about as normal as could be expected. Therefore, they did as well as they could in the dysfunctional yet stable home. But they also had delinquent older teens, Samantha 16 and Bradley 19, who were severely mentally ill, with both suffering from bipolar and multiple personality disorders. The pair of them were both as thick as thieves despite their age difference, and unfortunately, they often caused a lot of trouble in the home and around town together. Not to mention, they both had already produced children of their own at a very early age, which they couldn't really care for on their own either. Nevertheless, Diane had her hands full and was surely on the brinks of collapse. Yet day by day she stood her ground and maintained the best she could on the little bit of nerves and energy she had left in the 4 bedroom rundown shack the family called home. It was as normal a day as any in the Sandersons' household, but tensions were running high as Samantha had yet another one of her episodes. The younger children hooped and hollered and wailed for attention all throughout the day. Bradley had been missing in action for 2 days, probably on another one of his benders, and poor, worn out Diane had had about enough. So the daily screaming match between Diane and Samantha began early in the day about helping around the house and taking care of the smaller children. And the drama just escalated from there the remainder of the day. But by late evening, Samantha had barricaded herself in her room, leaving Diane to manage the house. Finally, the little ones had calmed down a bit after being fed and entertained with their favorite cartoons. Meanwhile, Diane found herself buried in a bottle of vodka and half a pack of cigarettes to take the edge off. However, too tipsy to have noticed, Bradley had casually crept his way back into the house without saying a word. It wasn't until Diane smelled the stench of something foul she knew something was up. So she made her rounds around the house, cautiously curious as to what the odor was. Diane first checked on the younger children, who had all fallen asleep for the exception of Arlen, who was playing his video game in the living room. As she made her way upstairs to Samantha's room, she could hear faint music blasting through her bedroom door. That was nothing out of the ordinary, but even with as tipsy as she was, she couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't quite right as the funky odor grew stronger. Once she made it upstairs, she noticed Bradley's backpack he carried everywhere was on the hallway floor, and she knew then he was home, but his room was pitch black dark with no sign of him anywhere. Diane only grew more anxious to know what in the hell was going on in her house, and by now furious that Bradley was doing drugs in the house too, pissed her off something serious. Finally, at the foot of Samantha's door, Diane busted in like it was nobody's business, only to discover more than she bargained for. Not only had both Bradley and Samantha been getting high, smoking sherm, but she caught the pair of them butt naked in the middle of the floor and in the act of having sex with one another. To say Diane was enraged is an understatement. She grabbed the first thing she could reach and hit Bradley over the head with it as hard as she could, thinking he was raping his own sister. But when both Samantha and Bradley jumped up, startled and yelling and cursing at Diane for barging in, she knew then they both knew exactly what they were doing. Shaken by what she had just witnessed, Diane stumbled backwards into the hallway with mixed emotions as she fell drunken to the floor. She knew one thing for sure, and that was Samantha and Bradley had to go, and she told them as much, which neither of them took kindly, slamming the door after Diane exited the room. Diane had reached her breaking point and angrily told her 2 oldest children they had an hour to get out of her house or she would shoot them both because they were beyond repair and she was done. She wasn't taking any more of their disrespect or bullshit, and now they were on their own. Diane stumbled back downstairs, had Arlen to get the other kids, and sent them to their rooms to bed. As she flopped down on the couch, poured herself yet another drink of vodka and cranberry juice while lighting a cigarette and loading her gun. She sat in wait of her doped up, mentally ill, incestuous oldest kids to make their disgusting way down the stairs so she could kick them out once and for all. But obviously, she must have lost track of time and got way too wasted because Diane dozed off right there in her living room on the couch, gun in hand and with dry tears still clinging to her face. 3:36 a.m. Diane was startled awake to the sounds of screaming children in the distance. It was Arlen, Tamron, and Kenneth yelling to the top of their lungs in fear. Diane jumped up so quickly her head was spinning. She couldn't believe she had slept through the night. She had hoped Samantha and Bradley had the sense to have already left quietly out the back door as she raced upstairs to see what was the matter. But nothing could have prepared her for the horror scene she was about to walk into. At the top of the stairs, in a pool of blood, lay 3-year-old Braxton. His throat had been cut so severely and deeply his head dangled off the top step. Diane screamed in horror as she aimed her gun shakily, unsure of what else she would find. She shakily stepped over Braxton as she approached the bathroom. The lights were on and she could hear running water in the tub that was overflowing to the floor, reaching the doorway of the hall. When Diane walked in to take a look, she saw her grandchildren, 3-year-old Yvonne and 1-year-old Audrey, floating in the tub full of water, dead from apparent drowning. Diane's body just collapsed, fell limp to the floor as she sobbed aloud. She felt like she could vomit everywhere, but knew she needed to get to the other children, who she no longer heard yelling for help. A million thoughts ran through Diane's mind as she slipped and slid across the floor, trying to get up. Samantha and Bradley had done something horrible. Diane hoped they were no longer in the house, but unsure, she kept her little 9mm gun tightly gripped in her hand with her finger on the trigger. Diane called out for Samantha and Bradley with every step she made towards the next room. She finally reached her middle son's room, and there they all lay. 6-year-old Kenneth, 9-year-old Tamron, and 11-year-old Arlen, who was barely clinging to life, still in bed with what looked like stab wounds all over their body. Diane yelled out in anger, "Why?" as she rushed over to Arlen, holding him close as he took his last breath. Diane, now soaking wet and drenched in blood, as she sat there depleted and contemplating suicide. She had nothing else to live for anyway. Her husband was gone. Her children were massacred by her oldest children, who were clearly out of their goddamn mind. What other reason was there to go on, Diane thought, as she wept in defeat. Then Diane heard the creepiest giggling she had ever heard in her entire life. As she looked up hesitantly, both Samantha and Bradley stood in the doorway of the bedroom. They were both covered in blood from head to toe and butt naked, standing there with this smug look on their face. Samantha, glossy-eyed, held a knife in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Bradley's eyes was bucked, and he had a hammer and was pounding it in the palm of his other hand. "So what we gonna do with this bitch?" Bradley asked Samantha. And in the most insanely cold yet childish voice, Samantha replied, "I don't know. It's up to you." Before the pair of them could take a step towards her, Diane scrambled for her gun, screaming, "Fuck you!" to the firstborn child she had given birth to, which pissed off Bradley immensely as he stormed across the room. By the time Diane got her gun in hand and fired multiple shots, Bradley had struck her in the head with the hammer. Samantha fell to the floor with a gunshot wound to the neck, and Bradley had been shot in the stomach and leg. Diane lay there amongst her deceased children, unconscious but not dead. By the time Diane came to hours later, Her entire family had been slaughtered to death. She did the only thing left to do, which was make her way back downstairs to call the authorities. Only when the police arrived, things didn't quite go as Diane thought they would, because in a shocking turn of events, she was the one who was now being accused of mass murdering her own family to rid herself of the enormous struggle of domestic duty and being the sole provider for mentally ill and disabled children. To say Diane lost it is an understatement, but sadly, she is currently highly medicated and awaiting trial in a mental facility. It seems the government had been surveillancing and targeting Diane's family for years, and this was all a setup all along. Both Bradley and Samantha were under MK Ultra mind control and were triggered to do what they did. So unfortunately, Diane is likely to never see the light of day or be free ever again. The middle class. The classic all-American family suburbly planted within a clean, quiet, friendly, yet community-oriented suburb. A charming place where the neighbors are friendly, look out for one another, and everybody knows your name. The homeland of the working class, where their hard work has paid off for the good of all of humanity. The Mansfield family. Blood and roots ran deep in their neck of the woods. With more than 3 generations growing up in their area, everybody within 100 miles knew exactly who the Mansfields were. Aaron Mansfield III, the successful lawyer of his own private firm, was blessed with a delightful family of 5. His lovely wife, Clara Mansfield, doctor of chiropractic, and 3 beautiful children, 6-year-old Daisy Mansfield, 12-year-old Evan Mansfield, and 15-year-old Laura Mansfield, who are all perfect students with excelling grades and high achievements. By all outward appearances, the Mansfields seemed like the perfect family without a flaw in sight. They resided in a gorgeous 5-bedroom, 2.5-bath home with a pool that served as their sacred haven, full of excitement, family fun, and entertainment. The neighbors just loved the Mansfields, as they coordinated neighborhood watch meetings and often hosted grand, lavish dinner parties, holiday social gatherings, and barbecue pool parties in the summertime. It goes without saying that publicly the Mansfields upheld a stellar image to everyone around. But little did everyone know something sinister was brewing behind closed doors that the Mansfields most assuredly didn't want leaking out into their conservative community. While on the surface, the Mansfield family seemed to successfully display the perfect example of a healthy, happy, modern-day family dynamic. However, nothing could be further from the truth, because the Mansfields were masters of disguise, masking their problems, downfalls, setbacks, and dirty laundry by overachieving in and around their community. Nobody really knew the depth of misery, anguish, struggle, sorrow, or disappointment that riddled the otherwise distinguished family. But behind the scenes, the Mansfields were cold, distant, and one tragedy away from everything falling apart. Mr. Aaron Mansfield is indeed a successful business owner of his own firm. With his proper upbringing, family wealth, and prestigious credentials and background, he is widely accepted amongst the middle to upper class citizens in his state and beyond. He is a supreme member of his local country club, as well as his involvement with a secret society as a 33rd-degree Freemason. An all-around good old boy, Mr. Aaron Mansfield was. If only he could get his priorities straight and affairs in order. But that would be just too much like right for the slick, sly, fast-talking, two-faced lawyer. You see, greed is one of the 7 deadly sins, and it seemed to have plagued Mr. Mansfield, who just can't get enough. With an ego the size of Texas, the man just doesn't know the meaning of no, and it's likely not many have ever turned him down. Aaron Mansfield is a charmer and has a way with words, which is why he can smooth talk his way out of anything. But lately, his misdeeds, bad business, and shady deals have caught up with him. There is no doubt Mr. Mansfield keep his books clean, but his consumption has caused disruption amongst his family, business rivals, and the loan sharks he owes a hell of a lot. The high and mighty Aaron Mansfield III has let his gambling and sex addiction get out of control, and if he doesn't make some much needed changes and improvements soon, everything he has worked so hard for is sure to be destroyed forever. With the knowledge of being $1.5 million in debt to the loan sharks, providing for a full-time mistress that's threatening to expose him, and his regular high-end escort habit, the situation he's in is a ticking time bomb that is ready to explode at any moment. Miss Clara Mansfield, the overall bona fide champion of middle-class women everywhere. The lady is like the Energizer bunny that just keeps going and going without wear, tear, or even complaint. No matter the number of tasks she has or all the responsibility that falls upon her daily, she's hands down the superwoman of her town, which is something that is overwhelmingly irritating to a few other middle-class house moms in her neighborhood. With her fake smiles attached, there are definitely more than a few that just can't stand the overachiever Clara Mansfield. Perhaps jealousy of her being a career woman and having a seemingly perfect life. But if they only knew the buried truths and heartbreaking emotions of Clara Mansfield, which she kept bottled inside from public view, then perhaps they changed their minds about envying her so. Chiropractic Dr. Clara Mansfield is a dedicated, hardworking woman who cares dearly about the health and well-being of others, no matter the aches and pains she endures herself. Her overall mission is to go over and beyond in any way she can for all those who seek her help or guidance, which many are truly grateful for. But deep down, Clara Mansfield is an unfulfilled, unsatisfied, lonely wife and mother who is fed up with disappointment and the lack of intimacy. Sure, she loves her occupation, her family, and the community, but the burnout and sexual frustration is all too real. Not to mention the lingering, pessimistic thoughts that her husband is no longer interested in her and is having an affair with someone more attractive. Nevertheless, she just keeps functioning on demand robotically because that's what everyone else needs from her. But really, her passion, drive, and motivation was gone long ago. Clara goes through the motions daily, but no one outside her inner circle has cared to observe the sparkle and lack of determination that has gradually evaporated from her eyes. Clara Mansfield is what and whom everyone else needs her to be, yet no one, not even her husband or children, care to put forth the effort to provide her with the love, support, appreciation, or respect she needs from them. Unfortunately, because of this and the lack of substance in her otherwise mundane life, Clara is clinically depressed, from which she has formed a deadly habit for the past several years to help her numb the pain of her brutal life and existence. Amongst copious amounts of liquor, which is her preferred poison of choice, lately her bottomless vodka martinis has been laced with lethal amounts of pain sedatives, which she has now formed an unhealthy addiction to. The Mansfield's children. An above average bunch of kiddos who have the kind of perfect mannerism any elder would love. Although superbly trained on how to carry themselves publicly, every once in a while the little ones can't help but act their age. From all outward appearances to prying eyes, the Mansfield children are just as equal to the rest of the kids in their neighborhood, but everybody knows all three were ridiculously spoiled and pampered with the expectation of them being the very best of all. After all, their parents wouldn't accept anything less. Daisy Mansfield, 6 years old and full of life. The bubbly, rambunctious first grader is as sweet as pie and excited about learning. However, she's rather overly hyper, which her parents tend to ignore for refusal to have her treated for the likely ADD or ADHD she has. Evan Mansfield, the 12-year-old genius mastermind, is totally reserved and antisocial. He'd much rather study, read a book, surf the web, play chess, or build some kind of creative invention than interact with peers his age. However, Evan isn't rude or weird at all, maybe just a little socially awkward, because he prefers isolation most of the time. But he does have friends with his same interests and mannerism. Evan also participates in several extracurricular activities and clubs for science, math, art, and chess. Laura Mansfield, the 15-year-old charming, bright, and popular social butterfly that everybody seems to love and flock to. She's top of her class as an honor roll student, a part of the student council committee, as the president of the student body. She's also cheer captain, as well as she's in the drama club and on the debate team. But unfortunately, little do the adults around her know, Laura Mansfield has spiraled way out of control, as she has let her popularity go straight to her head, and is now in over her head, as she's overly interested in the boy jocks at her school. Furthermore, now one careless mistake has the potential to ruin her life forever if she doesn't figure something out soon, because Laura Mansfield is hiding a huge secret from everyone. Not only is she no longer a virgin, but she has just discovered she's pregnant. The Mansfield family is a crumbling mess, and no one was the wiser as to what's truly going on behind their closed, eerie doors. But things were about to get scandalous in a way no one could have ever imagined. The neighborhood housewives gossip channels and primetime drama shows had nothing on the horrific tragedy that was about to shake their community to its core. It was all a matter of time as to who would snap first, Aaron, Clara, Laura, or maybe even little antisocial Evan. But tensions were rising as each family's secret crept its way out gradually amongst the family. At this point, tempers were boiling. Everybody was on edge, and something was bound to happen soon, in a desperate attempt to keep the public from knowing what a shame the Mansfields truly were. The day of reckoning had finally arrived for the Mansfields family, as Mr. Mansfield's deadline vastly approached. Unfortunately, Aaron was out of time, patience, and money, so he submitted to the only selfish thing he could do and hastily decided to make a knee-jerk decision on the fly that would save his ass but leave his own beloved family high and dry. With a prearranged business trip scheduled, Aaron Mansfield emotionlessly made his way to the airport for a summit meeting and convention he was attending in New York. But of course, leaving behind his unstable, poor, defenseless wife to manage the growing catastrophic storm brewing in their home. It was the same as usual for the Mansfields family, as they were used to Aaron Mansfield going on random business trips by now. But something just didn't feel right this time around. Clara Mansfield had all but given up on hope that she could form a better bond with her husband, so she just didn't even try anymore. Aaron departed without saying goodbye, and the family was just left feeling numb inside since they were already too wrapped up in their own issues to even care. Little did the family know, Aaron Mansfield made the decision to put them all out of their misery once and for all. While Aaron Mansfield landed at 6:30 p.m. without delay at his destination and later checked into his luxury suite, the Mansfield family went about their dysfunctional night as usual. Besides the occasional arguments between mother and daughter about their unfortunate circumstance, Laura called her mom a pissy drunk, and Clara fired back with slurs of her own by referring to Laura as an out-of-control pregnant teen Jezebel. The situation at hand was beyond heated, messy, and too scandalous for even TV. The two blood boiled in rage at each other. Meanwhile, Evan totally tuned them both out by isolating himself in his room and ignoring the madness. Daisy, however, in all of her hyper glory, ran around and played as always. She was the only person in the Mansfield home that seemed just peachy despite all the chaos she didn't understand. It was bound to be a long weekend for the Mansfield family. But as for Mr. Mansfield, who by now was cozying up to yet another high-end escort, kept himself distracted as much as possible for what was yet to come in the following days. What no one knew, for the exception of a few who were in the know and in on the setup, Aaron Mansfield made a deal to set him free of his burdens once and for all. The plan was to sacrifice his entire family to avoid public scrutiny over their scandalous misdeeds and to save his own ass from meeting with the Undertaker. An unfortunate tragedy was much easier to manage, Aaron was advised by the satanic powers that be, in which Mr. Aaron Mansfield would collect a $6.6 million life insurance policy payout for his family. That is a little over $1.5 million for each family member's death. He'd also gained and obtained a higher ranking within the secret society he belongs to as well. Aaron would then promptly pay off all of his debt of $1.5 million plus interest with the loan sharks and mob that he owed. Then he could revamp his life, or so he thought, per what he was told. Per Aaron's agreement and contract, the execution would happen while he was out of town on business, but he knew not the day, nor the hour, or how it would go down, or just how it would exactly. Therefore, he was forewarned to act as normal and usual as possible until he received a phone call. Friday night went by with no word from anyone. Aaron checked in with his wife on Saturday morning, and everything was fine, besides restless nerves, uneasy tensions, and Clara's usual hangover. Not trying to intentionally prolong the conversation, Aaron bid his wife and children farewell for the time being and let them know that he planned to travel back home by Monday morning. Not pleased at all with the short dialogue, Clara abruptly hung up the phone in Aaron's face. By late night Saturday, the Mansfield family were fast asleep when they were startled awake by a loud explosion. A gust of thick black smoke and overwhelming heat saturated the home instantaneously. Clara sprung into action without hesitation to check on her children. She could hear faint screams at the distance away, which sounded like Laura and Evan pleading for help. By the time Clara reached the hallway, she could see the entire downstairs area was engulfed in flames. Clara ordered Laura and Evan to stay put together in the hallway while she ran to recover Daisy, who was still fast asleep in bed. The house filled with smoke, so thick it was hard to see as the blazing flames were steadily rising. By the time all four family members were accounted for, the Mansfields were trapped with no way out. Clara rushed everyone to her bedroom, barricaded the door, and ordered the older children to wet towels and put them under the door, as well as to cover their nose, while she called for help. Clara called 911 to report the fire, which was rapidly growing. Clara and her children were stuck 3 floors up in her room. They broke out the windows of the room and began fiercely yelling for help. They could see the neighbors who heard the blast and began to gather together in shock around their house. A couple of the neighbors close by grabbed their ladders and their water hose, but neither of which could reach the Mansfield's family to rescue them in time. The two youngest children, Evan and Daisy, both passed out eventually from smoke inhalation. The raging flames had overtaken the entire home and had now made its way to the 3rd floor as it ravaged everything in sight. It wasn't long before the brutal fire violently burst through the bedroom door the family was trapped in. They all screamed in agony as the flames overtook them one by one. Finally, the fire department had arrived, but the fire was too extreme for them to extinguish it quickly. By the time the firefighters got their ladder to reach the room Clara and her children were in, they all had been severely burnt alive. Only Clara had a faint pulse, but she was barely breathing, yet unconscious. The 3 children were sadly dead on arrival, but Clara was carefully removed from the still burning home, charred from head to toe. She was rushed to the nearest hospital at Mercy St. Mary Hope Hospital, but Clara Mansfield succumbed to her injuries and took her last breath upon arrival at 3:33 a.m. Clara's last words mumbled to the first responders during her transport was, "It's all his fault." Without knowledge of what Clara meant, the medical unit just documented the encounter and relayed the message to the chief of police and fire. 6 a.m. Sunday morning, Aaron Mansfield received a call from an unknown number from someone with a disguised voice who simply said the package was delivered successfully. Then they hung up. Aaron Mansfield shakenly sat nervously while wondering what to do next. Then the phone rang again around 6:30 a.m. from a number from his hometown. "Mr. Mansfield, we have bad news, sir," a nonchalant yet calm and clear voice said from the other line. "There has been a disastrous incident, and we need you to return home swiftly, sir," the detective said. Aaron informed the authorities he was away on business, but would get home as soon as possible. "What's wrong?" Aaron asked cautiously. "We'd rather not discuss the matter over the phone, sir." "But your family is deceased, Mr. Mansfield," the detective replied. Aaron acted surprised as he wailed through the phone receiver. "How? Why?" he asked. "We can discuss the matter further upon your arrival, sir," the detective stated, not fully buying Mr. Mansfield over-the-top theatrics. "Okay, fine," Aaron whimpered. "I'm on my way." "Very well, Mr. Mansfield," the detective said, before ending the call. Aaron was puzzled. He had no idea his family would depart so suddenly. Nevertheless, neighbors began to call and text him frequently, and it was they who made him aware there was a fire in the entire house, as well as his family were completely gone. Aaron couldn't believe how tragic his decision would be for his family, not to mention the loss of his entire home, belongings, and all of their memories too. Aaron understood the deal he made with the devil all too well, but he was unaware just how vicious it would be. This had him spooked for probably the first time in his life. It finally dawned on him just what kind of monsters he was dealing with, and now he was one of them too. Aaron packed quickly and got on the first flight back home. By the time he touched down, he got yet another ominous phone call. Your payment is due in 2 weeks, the caller said firmly. And then there was dead silence before the phone disconnected. Aaron immediately went to the police station upon his arrival back home. They informed him of the tragedy, an ongoing investigation due to their discovery of arson and explosives being involved. Aaron felt like he was being interrogated with all the questions asked of him and about any problems at home or with his family. The detectives informed Aaron of his wife's last words and asked him what she could have meant. Aaron wasted no time shifting the blame from himself by telling the detectives his suspicions. He claims Clara must have met their son Evan, who was very antisocial but had a high IQ and was genius level smart. Aaron went on to explain that Evan liked building things, experimenting, and was very tech savvy. Then, frustratingly, Aaron asked the detectives if he needed a lawyer besides himself. Only if you feel that would be necessary, Mr. Mansfield, the detectives replied, before excusing him of any further questions for the night. Aaron left the station relieved for the time being, as if a heavy weight was lifted from his shoulders. He rented a hotel room for the night after going to his home and seeing for himself its complete and utter destruction. In the following days, the Mansfield house fire case was abruptly closed. It seems someone higher up contacted the police and fire chief and had them drop any and all investigations into the matter. Aaron Mansfield successfully went on with his life while receiving all the love, support, sympathy, and donations he could handle from his community. Everyone saw him as this grieving widow who had tragically lost his entire loving family and home. It was literally the talk of the entire state as news spread fast while they reported on the devastation and tragedy in the area. Eventually, Aaron received the life insurance payout of $6.6 million, dollars, and he surely, very promptly, paid off all of his debts as expected. In the following months, however, Aaron moved to a $3 million home out of the neighborhood his family grew up in for 3 generations, and he remarried his longtime mistress, which got the town's tongues wagging yet again. It wasn't long before rumors about the Mansfield family's dirty little secrets began to creep through the neighborhood in which he once belonged. Gossip began to circulate about Aaron Mansfield. Somehow, information about his extramarital affairs, gambling, and sex addictions swept through the town. Some people were filled with such disgust, anger, disappointment, and or jealousy that they claimed it was eerie how Aaron was all too eager to move on in a hurry after he got his settlement money. And then he started acting differently with the people who knew him best. People even speculated whether or not he had anything to do with his family's tragic death. People talked about the change in his belated unhappy wife and how her mood was different in her last days. A few of her patients even said she reeked of alcohol sometimes, probably in an effort to cope with her husband's behavior. However, the rumor mill didn't just stop in their neighborhood because even students said Laura lost her virginity at camp and later told her best friend she was pregnant. People around town were appalled, but Aaron just ignored it all as he lived his lavish life. He told his buddies at the country club it was all a lie, when in fact he knew someone was running a smear campaign against him and purposely leaking his family's secrets to try to expose him out of envy of his wealth. Aaron got his fortune and paid his debts for sure, but the very things he tried to keep covered up leaked anyway. Now he knows a deal with the devil won't last. The upper class, the renowned, untouchable, high and mighty society of the world, patronizingly basking in their lavish luxury of glorious wealth, power, privilege, authority, and abundance. The kind of breathtaking, extravagant, superb life most people in the world could only imagine or dream of. As much, if not more, could be said about the immeasurable Rochester family, one of the most high ranking superior bloodlines ever known. The well to do Rochester family had their hands into a little bit of everything beneficially worth exploring in life, including but not limited to politics, oil, banking, science, and technology, with their wealth net worth exceeding more than trillions of dollars. Unofficially, however, they even indulged in underground operations, organized crime, drug, and human trafficking as well. And as a result, more than half the gold owned in the United States of America belonged to the Rochester's family. Adam Rochester, a very prominent member of his family, besides him being born to his tremendously superior bloodline, he's a highly educated gentleman who has exceeded far past expectations academically and professionally, proudly carrying on the Rochester's family immaculate legacy. Although somewhat of a loose cannon, currently Adam Rochester is a successful businessman who is the owner of his own tech company, which has rewarded him with a multi billionaire status in his own right. Unfortunately, romance hasn't always been so passionate or the most delightful for the strapping middle aged man with two marriages and three children under his belt thus far. But perhaps three times is the charm, with his most recent decision to wed his third wife, Melissa Rochester, who has bore him a fourth child. As revered, accomplished, and well known as the Rochesters are, such prestigious glory hasn't come without the occasional tragedy to the family. It seems every decade, to be exact, the Rochesters ritualistically suffers great loss within their extensive family. But when it comes to Adam Rochester, who is no stranger to sacrifice, he seems to more frequently experience unfortunate tragic events in his personal life left unexplained to many. Adam Rochester is and always has been extremely bold, tense, and outspoken, which has caused him several clashes throughout his life. Problematic situations he'd handle in rather unorthodox ways. Little did outsiders know, but Adam Rochester had a bit of a vicious and wicked side that often caused him trouble, needing to be rectified due to his careless, reckless behavior. His concealed drug use, alcoholism, deceitfulness, and lust for professional escorts were only the tip of the iceberg when it came to Adam Rochester's bad behavior. But one would suppose he learned from the very best amongst the wealthy elites and his family. The Rochester's ranch was infamous for their exquisite underground parties and fine dining for those with an acquired taste. A gala of the most disturbing activities are known to those only of their kind or whom they cordially invited. Adam and his family hosted many events in which they offered their cannibalistic guests party favors and personal, pleasurable entertainment of traffic victims who would be ravished until their entire consumption, or the optional choice to consume them. As a result, many innocent victims lost their lives because of Adam Rochester, his family, and friends. But only few knew of the many lives Adam was responsible for taking by his own hands that were closer to home. 10 years old. Adam's personal bloodbath all started when he was just a boy. 10 years old, to be exact, was the first kill for him. Built up anger and desperation got the best of him one day when he was distraught over the sexual abuse he was suffering at the hands of his own grandfather, Rufus Rochester. Adam had no outlet for help. The women in his family were cold and submissive, and his father, Raymond Rochester, said he needed to learn from his elders the same as he did. So, time and time again, he noticed his grandmother would just turn a blind eye when she clearly knew what his grandfather was doing to him, just as she had done with Adam's father. This frustrated Adam beyond measure. So one day, after yet another humiliating, perverse session with his grandfather, Adam ran to the restroom in disgust to wash up as he wailed in agony. But on this day, as he peeked through the door, only to find his grandmother half nude and pleasuring herself at the sounds of his pain while readying herself for a bath. Before Adam knew it, enraged, he rushed through the bathroom door, catching his grandmother off guard, and he viciously pushed her as hard as he could. She stumbled and slammed her head on the side of the sink before crashing violently into her whirlpool tub filled with steam soaked bubbles. Adam just stood over her body in amazement as he watched his grandmother, Barbara Rochester, sink below the water. Afraid she might wake up, something possessed Adam to hold her head underwater just long enough to make sure she was dead once and for all. By the time Adam snapped out of his trance, he noticed his grandfather standing in the doorway of the connecting room to the bathroom in a blank stare watching him. Adam blurted out in fear of repercussions from his grandfather. She slipped and fell. Oh, hush, boy. No need to explain. I know. She always has been clumsy that way, he said, as he casually walked over and stroked Adam's head. A secret for a secret, my boy, Grandpa Rufus Rochester said. I'll never tell. 18 years old. Throughout Adam's early years, he was exposed to a lot of things. He learned the world he lives in of the wealthy elite is vastly different than others in the world. What those in power were capable of is virtually limitless. So Adam embraced his privilege as he became accustomed to the environment he was in. By his 18th birthday, the endless supply of girls available to him was plentiful. Rich yet less wealthy individuals often flocked their daughters in the face of the higher ups, often pimping out their own daughters for fame, fortune, recognition, higher up positions, titles, roles, or ranking. The night of Adam's 18th birthday party was no different as he scanned the crowd to see whom he may devour. Frankly, Adam had his way with a few girls that night, but it was his steady girlfriend who decided to make a scene out of jealousy, which angered Adam tremendously. Before he knew it, he had snatched his girlfriend into an isolated room and began to beat her, just as he witnessed his father do to his mother so many times. It wasn't until his entitled girlfriend began to fight back that Adam lost all control. Sheila Langley scratched him across the face with her ring while punching him back. Adam grabbed Sheila by the neck and choked her while he raped her viciously. It wasn't until she stopped moving that Adam realized he strangled her to death. Panicked and distraught to cover up his crime, Adam moved in a haste to clean up his mess. After he finished straightening the room, Adam opened the French doors to the suite leading to the outdoors balcony. He then picked up his girlfriend Sheila Langley and threw her over. Sheila slammed to the courtyard's grounds below as Adam sprinted back to the party unfazed. In the aftermath, of course, the matter was dismissed as an unfortunate suicide. Word is, Sheila became overwhelmingly depressed and jealous after seeing her boyfriend Adam entertain other females. As a result, it's said she ended her own life after getting overly intoxicated. No one ever knew the evil truth about what really happened because the Rochesters were fiercely protective of their image, family name, and legacy. So the situation was buried just as quickly as it happened. Meanwhile, Adam carried on with his life unaffected as he departed the family home for his placement at a prestigious college. 21 years old, Adam skated through college with the highest honors. By his third year of college, he was a frat leader president and also a member of a lucrative secret society. His pupils both respected and feared him as he paraded around campus like he was some kind of untouchable king. Unfortunately, tragedy just seemed to follow him everywhere he goes. But Adam didn't care because he allowed money, power, and leadership to go straight to his head. Between the wild frat parties and Adam's hectic dating life, it wasn't long before disaster struck again. Per usual, the college campus was jam packed with various events. Adam Rochester was busy recruiting new pledges and planning the biggest party for new members with his chapter brothers. He really enjoyed Hell Week, which was full of nothing but torment and humiliation for the new members accepted into his fraternity. The initiation and party night had finally arrived. Everything was going as expected through the initiation ritual. Then on to the biggest frat party being held that weekend. Between the dancing, drugs, drinking games, and random wild sexual activity going on in isolated rooms, some of the newest members were still being taunted as the weakest link of pledges. Haunted, in fact, as the night lingered on. Around 3 a.m., three of the new members were chased into the woods. They were highly intoxicated and could just barely keep their footing when Adam ordered them to strip naked. The trio were then blindfolded and told to keep their balance on water floats until sunrise. Whoever won would be rewarded, and anybody that failed would be immediately kicked out of the fraternity. The rest of the group hightailed it back to the party, while only a couple chapter members hid in the woods to keep an eye on the trio being hazed, just in case they decided to give up. The guys trembled in fear as they floated further into the water. Surprisingly, the new members did well for a few hours, but right before sunrise, disaster struck as one of the members fell around 6 a.m. Mark Island plummeted into the water, barely able to catch his breath while trying to stay afloat. The other two guys tried to keep their composure while still blindfolded but able to hear all the commotion around them. The two lookouts in the woods panicked as they called for Adam to return in a hurry. Mark's blindfold slipped off just as he descended further into the water. All of a sudden, Mark was attacked by an alligator that mauled at his legs and arms, and as a result, he drowned. By the time Adam and the rest of the chapter brothers arrived, it was too late. The others were pulled from the water, and as always, Adam was all too eager to fabricate some type of ridiculous cover story to save his own ass. By the time police were called and arrived on scene, the tragic situation was ruled an awful accident. When, if it hadn't been for Adam's demands, Mark wouldn't have never been in the water, drunk in the first place. 33 years old, Adam Rochester's behavior never really got better. He just so happened to be a brilliant mastermind. So getting women's interest was never a problem for him, especially with as much as he was worth. People tend not to mind his cockiness, and they did their very best to overlook his arrogance and rudeness. However, Adam finally married at the age of 24, and he had one child not long after. But because of his rambunctious behavior and infidelity issues, the marriage failed and was over by the time he was 30 years old. However, he moved on with his life without hesitation. Things were much more complicated for his ex wife, Rebecca Douglas Rochester. Adam fought her tooth and nail over money. She wanted more than he was willing to offer, so she made a mistake of suing Adam Rochester. Anyone with an ounce of sense knew better than to smear the Rochesters' name, no matter how awful they were. Unfortunately for her, Rebecca fought in a bitter battle until the very end. Tragically, all of a sudden, she lost her life in a freak accident while traveling. Adam just so happened to be celebrating his 33rd birthday when he got the awful news about his belated ex wife. Luckily, their son wasn't with her at the time upon her chaotic end. No one dared say so out loud, but it was whispered that Adam may have had something to do with Rebecca's untimely demise. 36 years old, Adam Rochester remarried at the age of 34. He and his beautiful second wife, Kelly Rochester, seemed to be a match made in heaven in the beginning, but because of heavy drug use on both their parts, Kelly kept miscarrying, which was frowned upon by the family. However, dedicated to cleaning up her act and making her marriage work with Adam, finally, Kelly gave birth to twins. Instantly, Adam was a father of three. Nothing besides money made the couple happier until a heart wrenching catastrophe happened yet again. Only 2 years into the marriage, one of Adam and Kelly's twins sadly passed away from a strange illness suddenly. Adam was 36 years old and at the peak of his success with yet another of his business ventures. But the trail of death surrounding him looked more and more like sacrifice the more wealthy, famous, and successful he got. Surprisingly, Adam and Kelly's marriage lasted another 5 years. But Kelly's mental decline greatly affected their marriage after the loss of their daughter. She just couldn't cope and began relentlessly hounding Adam about his alleged affairs. Kelly became obsessed and resulted in numbing her pain again with pills and alcohol. Adam, however, was unfazed and yet and still up to no good. The couple cordially divorced when Adam was 41 years old. The present day. Following Adam's second divorce, he was plagued with the death of his grandfather, the man that taught him so much yet caused him much confusion and pain in his younger years. In the end, Rufus Rochester left him $6 billion in his will. Months later, Adam's father, Raymond Rochester, suddenly fell deadly ill and he too passed away, leaving Adam $3 billion, gold assets, and one of the family businesses. At 16 years old, Adam Rochester finally rid himself of the two men he despised most, in spite of their evil, wicked ways, because of the trauma they caused him, even though they gave him so much. It was his pleasure to sacrifice them both, and as a result, Adam has the most successful tech and oil companies in the United States of America. With his accredited works and family lineage, plus his birthright, his net worth is now a whopping $3.3 trillion. And proudly, the new lovely wife in Adam's life seems to complement him so very well. Melissa Ashton Rochester, 45 years old, who comes from a wealthy, prominent family as well. She's a very intense yet talented scientist at a government institute and has recently blessed Adam with his fourth child. Furthermore, as proud as he may be of his accomplishments, Adam Rochester has yet to change his fast and loose playboy ways, still enjoying the company of male and female escorts, drugs, and any other pleasure of his choice. It's safe to say that Adam Rochester plans to live the good life to the fullest for the rest of his days. The end.